Now, we do have agendas, and I'll point out John and Kelsey. John's in the back with agendas. If you don't have one and you'd like one, I'm sure just put your hand up and John will try to give you one. Okay? Okay. Let's get started. My name's John Bickerman. I'm the mediator in this negotiation, and EPA asked me to come and moderate this public meeting tonight. And so what we're going to do is we have an agenda that you can see. In a moment, I'm going to ask EPA to introduce themselves, and General Electric is also here to listen. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to get input from the community. It's not the only meeting we're going to do this at, but it's the first meeting, and it's to give you an update on the process, and it's to talk about the process. And we hope by the time you leave here, you'll have a better understanding of how this process is going to work going forward, and hopefully you'll be able to have given me and the others in the room who are participating in the mediation some useful input about the type of things you would like to see in a settlement agreement if we're able to reach one. Okay? So I want to go over some ground rules with you first and make sure we're all on the same page in terms of ground rules. All right? After the preliminary discussion, EPA is going to make a presentation, and then I'm going to speak. After I speak about the process and about the mediation in general, there'll be an opportunity for public input. Kelsey and John, who I'll identify when I can find them again, I think they're in back, they're right back there. They're going to have microphones, and they're going to walk around with those microphones. I'd ask that you wait until you get a microphone before you speak so everybody can hear what you have to say. You might also notice that there are a few cameras around the room, and this meeting is going to be recorded. Okay? So give us a minute or so to make sure that we got the camera on you, you got the microphone, and that we can hear everything you want to say. So that everybody can speak, I'm going to limit the first round of comments to 4 minutes. In 4 minutes, you should be able to express a point of view. And once everybody's been heard, we'll go around for a second time. We're here from 5:30 until 8:30. No one should feel that they have left this meeting without being heard. But to be fair, 4 minutes the first time. Okay? I'm going to ask you to observe rules of common courtesy. Well, what does that mean? That means it doesn't help to have a yay-boo session, outbursts from the audience. That kind of inhibits our discussion. It doesn't advance it. The people who have come here to listen really want to hear your ideas. And so I would ask, and I would ask you to agree, that we're not going to have outbursts. We're going to listen quietly to what people have to say, and we're going to try to get a diversity of opinions presented tonight. I recognize that this issue has been going on for a long time. There are a lot of emotionally laden issues here, and there's a lot of strong feelings here, and I expect some of those feelings will come out tonight, and that's fine. But we're just going to observe common courtesy, okay? Pretty simple rules, right? Anybody think they can't follow those rules? This is where you get to show your hands. Anybody think that that's unreasonable, they can't follow the rules? Okay, so now that we're agreed that everybody's going to follow those rules, let's get started. I want to start by asking the folks from EPA who called this meeting to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Brian. Yeah, you can here. Yeah, come up here. Or you can just stand up.
I'm Brian Olson. I'm in charge of the cleanup programs for EPA in New England. So, like John said, we're here to listen to what people have to say, and hopefully we can shed a little light on the process and what's going on and everything. And I want to reiterate that this is only the beginning of the public process, and we will have a lot more public process as we've gone along. This process has actually been very slow so far, so we haven't gotten very far. So this is a good time to get some public input, but there'll be a lot more chances for that. Thank you very much for coming.
Here, take a mic. Just pass the mic to your friend who's sitting there.
Hi, I'm Tim Conway. I'm currently the Director of the Enforcement and Compliance Programs at EPA in Boston. I've also been an attorney on this project since 1998. and I wanted to thank everybody for coming out.
Thanks. I'm Bob Chancharulo, and I manage the New England Superfund program from Brian's office.
Hi, I'm Jim Murphy. I'm the Community Involvement Coordinator for EPA. I've worked on the site for a little more than a dozen years. I've met many people in the audience, and I'm glad to see everybody there tonight, and I hope we have a good meeting.
Hi, I'm Dean Taliaferro. I'm the EPA Project Manager for the GE Housatonic River site.
Okay, so let me tell you what this meeting is not about. This is not going to be a meeting where there's going to be a dialogue about the substance of the negotiation. This is a meeting to explain the process. It's not going to be the last meeting. There will be meetings in which we will talk about the substance. But even though the process, in theory, began 6 months ago, really didn't. I was brought on, I guess, in the spring sometime, but the mediation process did not really start until just after Labor Day. And since that time, there have been a number of mostly one-on-one meetings in which ideas have been kicked around. Now, people come up to me and say, well, gosh, that sounds like you're trying to cut a deal in the back room. How many people think it's going to be a deal cut in the smoke-filled back room? Okay, glad to hear that. Well, first of all, nobody smokes anymore, so there's no smoke in the rooms. But more significantly, that's not what's going to happen. Okay? Mediation doesn't work in a room full of people this large. And the reason it doesn't work is that a lot of mediation, good mediation work, involves brainstorming. It involves throwing out ideas. It involves all sorts of consideration of things that may sound off the wall. A public meeting is not the best place for that, because people don't do that. They're afraid that things they might say might be taken out of context, that's one. And more significantly, things said in public could come back to hurt their position if the case doesn't settle and it ends up in litigation. So much as I've had large meetings with 100 people in a room, I've yet to see someone stand up, slap their forehead and said, oh my God, what I just heard is right, I'm wrong, I'm going to change my position. Doesn't happen that way. What does happen is that through one-on-one conversations and various things that I can do to help assist the parties, we can begin to come up with the contours of a deal. And what I promise is that rather than this being done in a smoke-filled room, as we make progress in the course of these negotiations, we will be coming back to the public to solicit more input. Here are some ideas that we've been thinking about. What do you think about it? Okay? So there'll be plenty of more opportunities to talk about the substance, but that's just not going to happen tonight. All right? So, mediation works best when it's confidential. So I've heard a criticism, well, you didn't include everybody that you should have included. Well, that may be true. There may be some people that, have an argument they should have been inside and should be a participant, but there's a tension between how many parties you have in a process in which you're trying to go and reach out to everybody versus making progress. And the more parties you have ends up geometrically increasing the complexity and the difficulty of reaching negotiated settlements. And what I'm here to do is to try to help the parties. I don't have an axe to grind. I don't have a dog in the fight. I don't live here, okay? I recognize how hard and difficult this case is. When I go back to Washington and I talk to my friends who work in this field, they roll their eyes, they shake their heads, and they say, oh my God, that's got to be the most difficult case in the United States right now. The parties are so polarized. How are you ever going to get them to agree on anything? And that's the challenge. But I do know you haven't made much progress in the last decade or more. And parties have taken positions, and you're no better off than you were a decade ago. You're still in litigation, and litigation likely could ensue if there's continue to ensue for years unless there's a deal. So why not try mediation and see if it can't produce something that the community might find better than the alternative, that General Electric might find better than the alternative, and that EPA might find better than the alternative. And until you know what the alternative is, you'll never know if it's better or not. You know, I apologize. I failed to mention General Electric is also here, and I asked them to come. And they weren't all that enthused, I confess, but I asked them to come because I think it's important that they hear input from the community as well. And I understand that kind of meeting has gone on in the past, but I asked them to come, and they are here tonight, and they are listening. Okay. So in a nutshell, that's the mediation process. If there are more questions or comments about the mediation process, I'm sure you won't hold back. I'm sure we'll hear about them in a few minutes when we pass the microphones around. But I wanted to give you some context of how this process started, and I should add that I initially was involved 3 years ago, and that process didn't go anywhere, and I felt it wasn't going to go anywhere. But I am much more optimistic this time. I think that there's a potential for a compromise that could make things better than they are right now, and that's what I'm trying to help the parties do. Okay, let me see if I've missed anything. If not, I'm going to ask EPA to talk a bit about where they are in the process and give a few comments and what their goals are, and then we'll go into public comment. Okay? Tim, Brian?
Hi, everyone. I'm Tim Conway again. I wanted to address 2 points on the agenda: the status of the remedy selection and the EPA's goals for the mediation. First one, the status of the remedy selection. Many of you probably are familiar with the fact that the river is contaminated with polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, which have a number of health hazards for humans and for the environment. About 20 years ago, EPA, Massachusetts, Connecticut, the City of Pittsfield, and General Electric entered into a settlement where GE agreed to clean up the contaminated areas in Pittsfield as well as in the river. And the good news of this story is that we had broken that up into 28 different segments, and 27 of those segments are done, cleaned up. There's one left, and it's what we call the rest of the river, which is this part that we've been studying for quite a number of years. And to clean up this area, which is down from where the east and west branches, the confluence of them, where they meet, down through as far as the contamination goes, down into Connecticut. The EPA issued a cleanup plan in October of 2016. And EPA's got a process. When we issue a cleanup plan like that in an EPA permit, those get to be challenged by other parties as a way of making sure that EPA is on the right track with its cleanup plan. And ours was challenged by 5 parties, and we went to what's called the Environmental Appeals Board at EPA and the board heard challenges from the 5 parties who challenged us. They got written arguments back and forth from the parties, and a full day of oral arguments a year ago in June. And the board came out with a decision in January of this year. The board's decision, it agreed with the EPA on each of our points having to do with the amount of cleanup necessary for what we call the rest of river, for the river, the floodplains, the riverbank, the backwaters, all the areas related to the rivers south of the confluence. But at the same time, the board, with respect to where to put the waste material after the cleanup, the board said to EPA that it needed to go, that EPA had not shown definitively that that the EPA's proposed alternative, which was to take the waste off-site to a licensed existing landfill somewhere in the United States, that our record did not support that decision, and asked us to relook at that. And so over the past several months, EPA has been looking at the questions that the board raised with regard to the location of disposal. At the same time as we've been doing that, EPA decided we decided it would be worth our while while we were answering the board's questions internally to explore whether there is, as John was saying, whether there is one outcome, one settlement that all the parties could live with, that's consistent with the consent decree, and that could lead to a speedier and better cleanup, and that all the parties can live with. And so over the past several months, as John mentioned, I won't repeat all of that, but we thought that mediation would be a good way of seeing whether that kind of solution exists, and if it does, helping us move towards that direction. So that's our goal for the mediation, is simply to see whether there is a solution which everyone can agree with, consistent with the consent decree, and which can lead to a faster and better cleanup. And that's it for...
Okay. All right. So now it's an opportunity for public comment. I'll give these microphones to Kelsey and John. Okay. Okay. Go ahead, this gentleman. I'd ask you just to identify yourself.
Yeah, yes. Should I stand up?
Yeah, if
here?
you want.
Okay, I'm Sage. I live now about 1 minute away here near the river. I lived in Monterey before that. And I've lived in Connecticut on the other part of the river. I've lived up and down the river my whole life. And I didn't know how polluted it was until I was about 30, but I did go rafting in it lots when I was a kid. Thankfully, never ate fish from it. But what I want to say is that you keep talking about finding a solution that everybody's going to agree upon. I'm saying that a crime against humanity has occurred here, and General Electric put chemicals in the river that poison the river forever, basically. I know we're cleaning it up, we want to clean it up, but it's contaminated for the rest of my foreseeable life. And when somebody commits a crime, you don't try to find a punishment that they can also agree upon with you, as if everybody's just going to be happy. Because it's actually a situation of...
I think we all agreed on some ground rules. If anybody doesn't want to live with those ground rules, then we're not going to... No, I said no outbursts, no clapping, let people talk.
But thanks for the clapping, I appreciate it.
I'll ask for if people agree, but let's try to keep it just in terms of comments. Go ahead.
Yeah, so a crime against humanity and a crime against nature has been committed.
Okay.
And one of the parties who you're trying to make an agreement with is the criminal here. And I don't think it's a reasonable framework to try to find something that they're going to agree upon too.
Okay.
And because they have basically money as their interest. They want to minimize their losses, maximize their profits. Another part of this is that Monsanto made the chemicals. And I can't believe that in so many meetings, Monsanto is never mentioned. And Monsanto is also criminally liable for this because they lied about the risks. They hid the risks of the PCBs to maximize their profits. And this came out, there's definitive proof of this from 2000, from a lawsuit that regards Anniston, Alabama, where they made the PCBs. And the product name was Aerochlor, and I think there was another name like Fenitril or something, but these were bought from Monsanto, and that was part of the reason why they were dumped in the river too. So I don't understand why GE is alone named as the culpable party here too.
I'm going to ask you to wrap it up because you're approaching 4 minutes.
Okay, that's all I have to say.
Okay.
But this was a crime against humanity, and we're all paying for it for the rest of our lives. And the Scaticoke people who ate the fish, and our children, we're all...
All right, I appreciate
The land
your
is a
comments.
beautiful thing, and the land has been harmed.
Thank you, Sage. So.
I'm George Wislocki. I live in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and I've had a long relationship with the Housatonic River. There's one thing I want to correct you. We did have mediation way back then, but it ended up in a smoke-filled room. It was John DeVillers, it was the mayor there, it was people from the important people of Pittsfield, quote unquote. It was not. There were no environmentalists invited to that session, and what you got is something that is not very good. You have a hill in Pittsfield that is should never be there. That waste should have gone elsewhere, and I don't think I support mediation, but I honestly do not believe that this thing will end within a smoke-filled room. And I'm sorry about that, because it was very sad, and it was so poorly done. The first endeavor. Yeah. You have a challenge ahead of you. Thank you so much,
George. I am familiar with that process. You're right, and I think that it could have been done better. And I do know about that. I do know a great deal about that process, and I take your point. Yes, and I don't intend to repeat that process.
I wish you good luck in your charge.
And later, if you want, I'd be glad to talk to you a little bit more about that. Okay, who else would like to speak? And just identify yourself, please.
Sure. My name is Mary Jane Mattina. I've lived in Lenox for almost 50 years. Mr. Bickerman, you identified yourself as the mediator in this process.
Right.
Can you tell me who pays your salary, please?
Sure. So let me give you the context, okay? 3 years ago, as a result of that initial settlement that GE and EPA had, there was a dispute resolution process that called for mediation before further litigation. And on short notice, I was asked if I was willing to mediate. And so at that time, General Electric, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the state of Connecticut, and EPA all selected me to mediate. You asked the question, I'm going to try to answer you if you give me a chance. And so as a result of that, I was retained by all 4 of those parties. Now, I believe all 4 paid, but I'm sure it was more than just my memory. I don't want to misstate anything. So when this process, I was mediating another case in Rhode Island, and I was asked if I would be interested in coming back. And I said I would. I'd be glad to do that if there was a reason to do it, because I didn't think the last time it could have been successful. So I am a neutral. I am responsible to assist all of the parties. My fees are being paid by the 2 parties, General Electric and EPA, that were in that case initially. It's not uncommon for not all parties to pay in a large environmental dispute, because some of the smaller parties don't have the financial wherewithal to pay. But that doesn't compromise my ability to be neutral, and that never has in the past. So I hope that answers your question. Okay. Well, when you ask the question, am I hired? I'm not really hired. The hired's kind of a charged term, so let me try to explain that I'm being paid by General Electric and EPA, but I haven't been hired by them.
Okay, please don't push my comments towards a confrontational position, because they're not in any way confrontational.
Okay. I don't mean to be confrontational.
I wasn't trying to cut you off. I'm just curious, you're a completely neutral party who does this as your profession. That's all I'm trying to clarify.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I've done this in every region of the United States for EPA over the last 25 years. Let's see if we can get somebody on this side. Sir.
Hi, my name is Charlie Cianfarini. I'm a member of Citizens for PCB Removal. We formed 20 years ago for the residential properties in Pittsfield that had received contaminated fill from General Electric. There's over 300 properties that have been either completely or had some kind of remedy on their properties to remove PCB contaminated soil. One of the things I'd like to say, I met John personally, and I know he's saying that we need to be civil and we need to be polite, but if somebody makes a statement that the majority of people in here agree with, we have the right to applaud and accept those comments. That's not being impolite, and that's not being mob mentality. One of the things I'd like to say about the process that as it goes forward, and I want to appeal to the members that John is meeting with, whether it's behind closed doors, confidential, there's a number of groups out there. Please remember that the science should be on our side. PCBs are bad. We need to get rid of them. We need to get them out of our river. They've been proven to be bad. Even Tim said that. And when he says he wanted a better cleanup, we want a better cleanup than has even been proposed so far. There is a lot that needs to be talked about. The science says we need to get rid of this stuff. And so making an agreement that just may put a dump in Lenox is not the solution. So, thank you.
Sure, over here, and then we'll go back over there. Well, we'll go over here first. Go ahead. Oh, he's got the mic first. I'm sorry. I didn't see it. Go ahead. And then over there.
My name is Warren Archie, and I'm a member of the Lenox Board of Selectmen. Though I'm not representing them tonight, I have some comments I'd like to share with you and some ideas I'd like to see considered. I would much rather than making another mess on the river, I would prefer to see chemical and biological neutralizers for the PCBs. Though that's not been...
Just hold the mic a little closer. They can't hear you in back.
I'm sorry. I would like to see chemical and biological neutralizers to be used on the river this time, rather than making a big mess as has been done in the past. And chemists say if you can make it, you can break it. And I believe that that's possible, that perhaps it'll take an MIT or equivalent to do that kind of thing, but let's not make another mess. Item 2. The mess of only cleaning up 25% on Woods Pond will stress out our roads and bridges substantially, and what if there's a spill of these chemicals? That could be really substantial. And toxic waste, we don't need any more distribution of that. Item 3. Sorry, this seems to be disjointed. Lastly, I will bring a motion to the Lenox Board of Selectmen to have our police department prevent GE from conducting any cleanup on Woods Pond. And I would suggest that each town along the river do exactly the same thing. And that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Okay, over here. And your name is?
My name is Reed Anderson. I am on the CCC. I am also a board member
What
of...
CCC, not everybody may know not what CCC is.
The Citizens Coordinating Council.
Good.
And I'm a board member of HRI, Housatonic River Initiative.
Okay.
And I'm also part of Stop the Dumps. I live in Risingdale, if you're not familiar with that. That is the small town between Housatonic and Great Barrington. It's a dale. And my bedroom window looks out across the river to where the dump would be. When I hear people speak about coming to a compromise, I have to wonder, what do I have to compromise with? I have my house. I moved here 3 years ago, and I love the community. I have my kids. Here they are. Here's one, and there's the other doing this homework. I've got a wife, dog, some chickens. But when we talk about compromise, we're talking about a great weight upon the citizens of these communities, of which I am one. My property value with a PCB dump 100 yards from my house, I don't know. I think we all don't need to be mathematicians to know that it would tank. The other thing is, when this whole proposal of putting dumps right beside the river in communities that are vibrant and responsible for hundreds of millions of dollars in tourist revenue in the state of Massachusetts, jobs for all these communities. When I talk to my kids and I talk to their friends and I say, yeah, they want to take the junk out of the river and they want to put it right beside the river. I mean, kids, these children look very confused. That doesn't sound right. And here I am, I'm a grown adult, and I'm thinking, I mean, that sounds like a stand-up routine. You know? It sounds like I'm actually starting a joke. And so I would just ask that when we talk about compromise, that the parties realize that, you know, while I do want them to reach an agreement, that they take a moment and look around this room at these faces. And these faces are connected to other faces in this community. These compromises will affect people's lives far beyond this auditorium. We have to remember that. And the EPA has to remember that when they are negotiating any compromise.
Okay.
Thank you.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Valerie Anderson. I live in Pittsfield. My father worked for GE in the factory for 41 years, directly with PCBs. He did have cancer. So did my mother. I moved away and came back here in 2003 to take care of my mother. And I had 2 children. And my son, I got involved in this because my son was playing baseball at Allendale School playground when they were dumping the PCBs from the cleanup of the Housatonic next to Allendale School. And the foul balls would go over the fence. And the kids would climb the fence over onto the toxic waste dump and get the balls. And I'd tell them, don't go in there, that's toxic waste. And they said, well, what difference does it make? It's right there. So I started going to the Citizens Coordinating Council meetings and getting involved. And one thing that I'm really disturbed about is that our community has a disproportionate amount of toxic waste dumps already. We've got 2 right in the middle of Pittsfield, right next to Allendale School. There's 2 of them there. One's called Hill 78, the other's called Building 71. Then there's another one not too far away from that never got cleaned up. It's under the old GE Plastics parking lot near Uncomet Brook. And that never even got cleaned up because that wasn't part of the consent decree to clean it up. All they did was reroute the river that was going through it around it. So there's that toxic waste dump too. So there's 3 major toxic waste dumps right in Pittsfield that we know about. And now GE wants to put at least 1 more down in the beautiful city of Lenox or Housatonic or Lee. Looks like the Lenox place is their favorite because it's, you know, near Woods Pond. And I'm very disturbed about that, and I hope that the towns don't accept dirty money from GE in exchange for letting them put another toxic waste dump in Berkshire County. Another thing GE has always said is that, Hill 78 in Pittsfield is very safe, so we should make another safe toxic waste dump in Berkshire County. There's precedent for that. Well, there's also precedent for taking toxic waste and getting it out of Berkshire County, because after they filled up Hill 78, they had more toxic waste to dispose of, and they did ship that out of state. So there is a precedent for shipping toxic waste out of Berkshire County. In addition, our neighbors over in the Hudson River area, all their toxic waste got shipped out. They didn't put that next to the Hudson River. So there's a lot of precedent for keeping the toxic waste out of where you clean it up. Like Reed said, it makes no sense to call it a cleanup when you take toxic waste from one spot and you dump it in another spot.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Over here.
Hi, I'm Dave Gibbs. I'm a member of the Citizens for PCB Removal, a member of HRI. Years ago, we put our trust in mediation. We wound up with Hill 78 and 71.
Hold the mic a little closer.
We wound up with Hill 78 and Building 71 with trusting mediation. Our problem is the people that are mediating this and negotiating this don't have to live next door to it. The people that should be negotiating it should be some of the people who are going to have to live next to it. Like me, I live at ground zero, as I used to call it, right next to the river in Pittsfield. I had a chain link fence put around. I can't get to the river anymore because the chain link fence is protecting me from the PCBs. What's going on? You know, here we are, we're trying to trust these people and we're not getting what we're asking for. Thank you.
Okay. Over here.
Hi, my name is Robert Heinzman. I live in Lee on High Street. And I'm not a member of any of these organizations, although I might join. I might join some of these organizations. I wonder, I have a simple question, and maybe I'm not the only one who doesn't get it. Why is there a mediation process?
Okay.
Kind of following, see if you could just answer that first. I have a couple
Sure.
questions, but if you could answer that.
So, yeah, I'd be glad to. In fact, I was going to jump in a minute or two. So if I could first, I'd summarize what I've heard so far as everybody that has spoken seems to have taken a position of no dump, take it all off-site, right? So just to confirm that I'm right, let me just see a show of hands, because I'm not as good at listening to applause. Okay. So the audience, I would say, is more than 90%. There may be a few people that didn't put up their hands, but more than 90% of the position that there should be no dump in Berkshire County for PCBs that come out of the river. That's what I've heard. Okay. So why are we doing this? I mean, why am I here? Why bother coming from Washington, D.C.? Well, I think the answer is this. If there's no settlement, this process is going to continue and continue. And it's going to go through a process at the EPA called the Environmental Appeals Board, and then it's going to get appealed to a court in Boston, and then it could go back to EPA, and then it could go back to the court. It's quite possible that the community could end up with no resolution for a very long time. No lawyer in this room or anywhere is going to guarantee either the community or, for that matter, General Electric, guarantee them an outcome, because they can't. The process of litigation is uncertain. And so the reason I'm here is not to promote putting a dump in Lenox or Lee or anywhere else, or to promote taking it all off-site like they might have done in other places. That's not my role. My role is to see if there's any creative solution that could possibly be in between the two extremes. So that's the purpose of mediation. I don't know whether I'm going to succeed, but I think that it's worth at least investigating. And maybe there's a solution that so far nobody's thought of that could protect Reed, who is near his, is in, eyesight of a dump, or you, I guess, who has a chain link fence, if I got that right, that prevents him from getting to the river and getting the river cleaned up. and getting a more enhanced, better cleanup than you otherwise had. I apologize for taking so long, but that's the answer.
No, I understand your role. I've been involved in mediations before. I totally understand your role. It's an essential role. There was a consent decree to clean up the river.
Well, the consent.
Yes. Why are we?
I'm not going to. I don't want to get too much into the substance, but the consent decree provided for a process by which, if there was a disagreement over the consent decree, over the cleanup that was proposed, there was a dispute resolution process that began 3 years ago, which I participated in, which included mediation. But now it's in litigation. Now, this is voluntary. What we're doing now is voluntary. It's not part of a consent decree, but it was at the encouragement of the Environmental Appeals Board, who looked at this situation. They've got experience across the country and said, gosh, maybe you guys should try again. Maybe there is a middle ground here that you just haven't really considered. And that's why we're here. I don't know. I mean, look, if 90% of you are opposed, and it'll never happen, and you tell your elected officials, we don't want to do this, they can withdraw, and the process could very well die an early birth, and you'll be in litigation, and that will be the outcome. That may not be the best alternative. I think at a minimum, and this is me speaking, I mean, not specific to here, but just more generally, the kind of things I teach my class at Cornell, is before you reject an alternative, it's worth finding out what the alternative is. And you don't know what the alternative is because we've never gotten there. You may, at the end of the day, have an alternative here, and you'll say, gosh, we never thought we could do this or that, and gosh, this might be better than, what we had initially thought. But until you see what the alternative is, you can't reject it. So that's the point of mediation, to see if we can come up with an alternative, not in any smoke-filled back room, but to bring back to here in the future for the public to see, drive it, test drive it, comment on it, improve it, and see if that's better than the alternative of years and years of litigation where the stuff stays in the river and continues to be a source of contamination and frustration. That's the reason.
Okay, so we're mediating this because
Go ahead.
GE polluted the river, and we're negotiating with GE to find a mediated solution, or GE will lock the process up in the courts through litigation.
Well, you're blaming GE, and I hear that. All right,
No,
all right,
keep it simple.
Ask,
Wait,
I'll do this.
I'm not.
How many people agree with that statement? Okay, it's better than you guys yelling out. Okay, so they agree with you.
No, I'm actually, this is not complicated.
Okay.
GE polluted the river. The EPA said that was bad. You've got to clean it up. And so we have to mediate and find a compromise, or GE will lock this up in the courts, and we'll probably be locked up for a long time.
I can't talk about the
hang on. I'm trying to interpret what you just said.
Well, I'm going to try to explain. I can't comment on the substance of this case because that's not where we're at. I can comment on negotiations I've done across the country from Port Angeles to Miami, Port Angeles, Washington to Miami, and to New England to Arizona. And there are lots of ways to do a cleanup. The community, witnessed this evening, is very, very opposed to a cleanup that would involve a dump in Berkshire County. I got it. But there are lots of cleanups across the country that have varying elements to them, and some of them, they have a variety of things. And all that is being said here, and the reason you're here, I don't think is because the parties have not agreed on the cleanup, and that was part of the consent decree. And they're exercising, GE's exercising its rights to say, hey, we think we have a better idea, and the Environmental Appeals Board did not, as of today, accept the cleanup that the staff had proposed, and so they said, go back, and before we get your ideas again on a remand, more litigation, try to come up with something that might be better. That's why we're here.
No, I understand.
Okay, is that fair? I mean, I don't mean to filibuster. I'm trying to explain.
No, I understand. That's right. And perhaps you can direct me. As a trained aqueous geochemist, environmental geochemist, I'm a little curious why we would be putting the dumps in what we call a high-energy fluvial environment right next to the river on unconsolidated glacial tills.
Okay. All right. Now you're above my pay grade, but I will tell you that
I'm just trying to communicate that there's a technical issue here, and I'm kind of wondering what's the logic.
There's no question there are technical issues, and EPA's mission is to protect human health, and that's what they're trying to do. And I think that what they're trying to do in the negotiations that I've witnessed so far is to maybe advance human health in this cleanup better than what was initially proposed. That's what I see. Now, okay. I can't get into the substance, and I probably have spoken a bit too much already, but I think that...
No, it's okay. Let me interrupt. Maybe I can get with one of the EPA guys, and they can scratch my itch around this.
Maybe you can, but not right now.
No, afterwards. They can help me out. Thank you.
I hope that helps. All right, back on this side. Why don't we let Tim talk? Go ahead. Tim Gray.
Hi, I'm Tim Gray. I'm director of the Housatonic River Initiative. Got involved in the PCB mess in 1976. I took the first samples out of the river. Still going to meetings after 25, 30 years. And this whole cleanup is absurd. What's on the table right now, we're supposed to have a negotiation going on, but where does our negotiation start? Right now, we're starting with an EPA plan, that leaves millions and millions, hundreds of thousands of PCBs in the river after they clean out the 100,000 PCBs that EPA is requiring under their permit. So why are we cleaning the river if we're going to leave 2/3, 3/4?
Microphone by your mouth.
Why are we cleaning the river if we're leaving all these PCBs in? We're going to be meeting like they're doing on the Hudson right now, because EPA blew it on the Hudson also, where they're now going back and looking at the PCBs that they cleaned up 10 years ago. And guess what they found out? They didn't clean up enough. And the fish are still getting contaminated. We're going to be in that position. It's going to be 30 years in that because we didn't take care of business first.
Tim,
Sorry about that.
So, Tim, what you're saying is...
Let me finish. Let me finish, please.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to stick to my 4 minutes if I can do it.
Okay.
Okay. And so now we have a plan on the table. We have this 1 million cubic yards taken out, millions being left in it. Okay. The state of Massachusetts Fish and Wildlife got involved, and they convinced the EPA and the GE to leave the sensitive areas alone. Don't clean up the sensitive areas in the river. That's part of the plan. Does that make sense to you? The salamanders, the critters that live in the sensitive areas, you don't leave them contaminated. You clean them up if you're going to do a good job. And I want to mention, John, there is a way to a good cleanup. Instead of just letting GE walk all over us and give us what they want, which is what they're trying to do, and they've been in court for 20 years trying to fight us and weaken the cleanup. Okay? Number 3 is this absurd plan, as has been talked about tonight, about dumping on the sides of the river. As Reed mentioned, the kids understand this is stupid.
Okay.
And so we're saying those 3 things right there give us a crappy cleanup.
Microphone.
A crappy cleanup. It's the one that's on the table, and now we're negotiating with GE. What? What for? The only reason we're at the mediating table, because if we aren't at the mediating table, my group, they take our rights away to participate in court, which they really are trying to do with HRI any way they can. They'd love to take our rights away to participate, but we're not giving up yet. And I just want to say to this town, to the towns around Berkshire County, we should all be working together to tell EPA you can do a better job, you can clean up more PCBs, so someday down the road we don't have to do this all over again. And we could use innovative technology, which HRI held the first conference in 1995 because we knew it would be the best way to maybe deal with these toxins in the river instead of putting them on the side of the river. Maybe we can have one of these companies. We can have one of these companies come in and show us. We've been advocating for pilot tests for 20 years now. It would be a real simple thing. EPA doesn't seem to want to, we don't do pilot tests, you know. So I'm going to stop here. I can go on for 5 hours, as you probably know, but I'm here to say that we don't have to take this. And we need to fight as a community to tell them that this dump stuff is bad. Cleanup of the river has to be tightened up. And please clean the salamanders and the critical habitat of the river, because if we're not doing that, this is all a joke.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to go back to this side.
Hello, Mr. Bickford and Bickerman, I'm sorry.
You can call me
and
John.
Respected members of the EPA and the rest of the community in Berkshire County. My name is Claire Leahy. I have lived in the Berkshires since the 70s. I have to compliment Tim on dedicating his life to this river. I'm living in the home of my husband, who's here with me tonight, Ed Leahy. We're elderly. We're living in a house that's been in his family for over 100 years, and it's right next to the river. We live right at the confluence of the Washington Mountain Brook and the river. We do have the train tracks in between. Maybe that's a dike that stops the PCBs, but I don't think so. We are right on the floodplain. My 4 children have grown up in this house. I just got an email from my oldest son today, my 51-year-old. He's the most likely to want to come back and keep the family home. He said, Mom, we used to go in those sand pits. They were full of water that leaked in from the river. They're already contaminated. We live below another landfill that was Smith Paper Company that was filled in just above our house. I don't know how much of that has seeped downhill into our pasture where our horses used to graze, and I don't know how much effect that had on them having an early death. They had systemic issues. We actually had a horse graze over in a pasture right next to the river, and that's when we had some problems start. I've heard that bladder cancer is quite at a high rate in the Berkshires. I've been through 2 cases of bladder cancer, and my doctor, my urologist, can't understand why, except he knows where I live, and he has not said anything, but I think he probably wonders about that. So I'm looking down the road, what's going to happen if one of us is left alone in the house? We want to continue out our days there. We want to be able to pass our home on to our children. What value will it have? My children, when did we know? 76, that the PCBs were a real carcinogen and that they were in the river? Is that when we first knew? Because my children used to go up and go frog hunting in Woods Pond. They ate the frogs. They're all okay, but maybe down the line they won't be. They played in the river all the time. So we've lived through this. The house it's 178 years old. It's got a dirt cellar. I don't know how much has come in. The water rises up. We're right on the same river level. So I don't know. I really don't think I should have any tests done, because that would just be something I probably would have to declare if I ever wanted to get rid of the house. So that's my concern. And I do have 2 questions. One is, why did the appeal by the EPA get stopped? Was it simply because they saw that there was never going to be any alternative, that this is the way it had to go? The alternative to dumping in the county is to dump it somewhere else. So I don't understand what the question is.
Okay, I heard the question. I can't answer that because I don't know. On this side.
And I have one more question, sorry.
Okay, real quick.
Why is the DEP of Massachusetts not involved? Why have they chosen not to be here to help out our county?
Okay.
You have no answer for that?
Well, I can't answer because I'm not the
Yes,
Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I'm an mediator. This side. Go ahead.
Hi. My name is Bob Tertz. I live in Lee. My wife and I moved to Lee on a full-time basis in 2009, so we're kind of latecomers to the issues here. As I understood the issue in its grossest form, it's where do you put the wastes? After listening to many very intelligent and very well-spoken people tonight, the issue is much more complex than that. I spent close to 50 years as an attorney doing a lot of litigation, and I agree that in many cases litigation is not the way to resolve problems, and that mediation or arbitration frequently are better alternatives. But I think that mediation is best suited where one party is suing another party for a sum of money, $100,000, and they sit down and they mediate and they decide that the cost of litigation is so high that maybe it's better, instead of $100,000, let's give them $50,000, and we won't spend $100,000 in legal fees, and that will be more. I don't think this is that kind of an issue. I don't think this problem is really subject to mediation. If you just look at the question of where to put the waste, how do you resolve it? I think almost everyone in this room, including my wife and myself, believe that it should not be in Berkshire County and that it should go to a licensed landfill. There's no alternative. It's either that or Berkshire County. I mean, how do you resolve that? You don't resolve that by mediation. You have to do something other than that. You can't say, I'm going to move it closer to the border of Berkshire County, or maybe we'll move it across the river to New York State. And the other side says, no, we're not going to do that. We don't want to spend the extra $100 million plus to move it over there. I don't think this is going to be solved by mediation. I think this is going to be solved by technical people as technical witnesses saying what is the best resolution of this problem. This is a problem. It's been called a crime against humanity. It's been called a crime against nature. I've heard that myself tonight. I tend to agree with that, both of those statements. And I think that here the towns and the state really have to put their heads together and decide that it's better to fight and better to win than to say, okay, we're going to let them take half of the waste out, but we'll leave the other half here. And if the kids play with that half of the waste, well, it's not as bad as playing with all of the waste. I don't see anything like that working. I think that we really ought to be prepared for and geared for a fight to the finish over this. And I think that GE will lose that fight, and I think they should lose that fight.
Okay, thank you. This side.
Hi, I'm Narayan Schroeder with Berkshire Natural Resources Council, and happy to speak right after that gentleman, although he said pretty much the same thing I was going to say. What is it that we could possibly mediate here? We're going to, like every other truckload, go one here and one to Texas? I mean, there really doesn't make a lot of sense to me that there be some mediation to resolve this situation. I also feel like, given how many years it's been and how much work and how much fighting has already happened, what's in front of us is already the compromise. And that's already been done, and GE is simply just trying to wear everybody out, and we can't let that happen. And I think that, you know, something that you said that I'd like to just maybe correct you on or make a statement on, but I think everybody has a dog in this fight, because if you've ever eaten a piece of fish out of the Atlantic Ocean, you've probably got GE PCBs in you, and I think it's damn well time we get them cleaned up. And this is our one chance to hold GE to that and make it happen. And I think we'd be crazy to let them off the hook now with some tale about compromise or mediation. And I think we should take them to court and be done with it, because that's what's going to happen anyway.
Okay, thank you. So before we take another question, I want to stop for a second. So we've been at this for about an hour. Granted, there's been some preliminary comments, and I would say the comments have been universally the same, you know, some variations on it. And I wonder if there's anybody that has a different point of view in this auditorium, other than what we've heard. You're putting up your hand because you have a different view. Okay. Let's listen to a few different ideas. Well, we're going to give you one. I know. I understand.
Okay. My name is Phil Gilardi. I grew up in Pittsfield, about a block away from Allendale School. I played ball at Allendale School. I've kayaked the Housatonic from from East New Lenox Road up to Kerwin Park. I've seen people swimming there. I've seen people ice fishing in the wintertime. I live about 3 blocks away from the Housatonic on Pine Knoll Road, and I followed it all of my life, but never had access to all the information that PCBs are. I know PCBs are maybe carcinogenic, and it seems like they're not air volatile. They can't get them from the water. They work their way into the dirt, and the snails eat them. The fish eat the snails, and if you eat the fish, you're bad. But all the posters that I see at Woods Pond says don't eat the fish, and I've seen those posting all around. Now, I don't know why the PCBs from the rest of the river, all 27 articles, are parked at Hill 78 in Pittsfield, where the deer and the antelope play. It doesn't seem to be any particular problem. I don't know why, if the precedent has been set that they put a landfill right in the middle of Pittsfield, and it's been there for 20 years, and hasn't caused a lot of stink, a lot of problems. I'm not sure why people are worried about getting it in a landfill outside the river. The problem I see is if it's in the river, it's bad because it moves. If you get it out of the river and park it on dry land and put a tarp around it, it's a hell of a lot better than being in the river. So my alternative would be, hey, motherhood says get it the hell out of bring it to Texas. They got a lot of oil, they spill a lot of oil, so that's fine. But we benefited from GE for 70 years. They built transformers here, and it's our oil. They did a bad job by disposing of it in the river. What I'm saying is the precedent has already been there. It's in Hill 78. It's in Silver Lake. I mean, Silver Lake, they didn't take out the oils. That had so much oil on it, it set fire one winter. Okay? They put a piece of plastic on and they left it in there. So I'm not sure the precedent is we left it in Pittsfield in the middle of the city. Now we're worried about putting it in the boonies. Now Lenox is not the boonies, but it's pretty far away from the center of Pittsfield. Now it's been over 40 years since PCBs have stopped being polluted in Pittsfield, and it'll probably be another 40 years when this goes to litigation. I'm saying is PCBs have a half-life. You can argue about them, but Wikipedia says it's 17 years. Okay, if you every 17 years it gets cut in half by a half. It's been 3 time constants. What you put in 77 is 1/8 of what it is now. In another 40 years, it'll be 1/64. So if you don't do anything, it'll naturally clean itself up. Okay, so the other thing is, okay.
He's got 1 more minute. I'm watching. Everybody's,
okay,
let's be fair to everybody.
I may be the 1% or the 10% that I just think that we're making mountains out of molehills for this thing. We're not. The precedent is a landfill is in Pittsfield. I don't see I don't see why you got to move this stuff to Texas. Okay. I think you got to get it out of the river, make it safe. But I don't see any documentation. I don't know why, if you don't remove the PCBs from the rest of the river,
okay.
I don't know what bad things are going to happen.
Thank you.
Because they haven't happened yet.
Okay. Anybody else have an alternative view than taking it out of the river? Somebody's pointing. I can't tell. Okay, go ahead. Whoever's got the mic, I can't see you, but I'll hear you. Okay, we'll get to everybody. Everybody's going to get a chance to speak. We're here till 8:30. Go ahead.
Yes, my name is Tom Stokes. I live in Stockbridge. And I'd like to address a couple points that Warren Archie brought up and Tim Gray. And I'd actually ask that Brian, who is with EPA tonight, we haven't heard from, who is a very thoughtful person, might address them. And I worked with Brian back when I was active in this issue 20 years ago. Namely, the biological, chemical, technical fix. As Tim indicated, you're not going to get a whole lot of this PCBs out. All the proposals before us now, you leave a lot in there with problems that will stay with us. As Warren indicated, removing it, trucking it to God knows where has its own environmental impact. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but what I'd like to hear from Brian, if possible, is what the latest thinking is in terms of technical, innovative fixes that don't require removing all the PCBs from the river. What's the latest on biological and other technical fixes? And as Tim rightly indicated, why hasn't more been done here in the Berkshires to explore that? And as Warren indicated, why aren't we bringing in the best scientists from the state, from the nation, and everywhere to try to help us solve this problem as a number one priority?
Well, I think that's a, Tom, I think that's a useful suggestion, and I think that's precisely the kind of input we were hoping to get from the community, ideas that we could try to meld together into a proposal. I don't know that Brian's willing to respond to you, so let him have it.
Hi, Tom. It's good to see you again. Good to see you. So I have been part of this process for 28 years now. Started when I was 12. But I'll just answer that quickly. I probably will say something later on after everyone else gets a chance, but on the biological issues, we haven't found anything or seen anything that's promising for these types of PCBs. Obviously, there's biological cleanup going on everywhere in New England for things like gasoline spills and that sort of thing. But for these highly chlorinated PCBs, we haven't seen anything that's promising. But certainly as we move forward, and not only whether there's some mediated agreement or whether we go through litigation, we're always going to be looking for that next thing that could be the silver bullet that could help us to get things cleaned up better and faster. So that's never going to go away. We're still looking, but there's nothing out there as of right now that we've seen that's promising for these types of PCBs.
Okay, we're going to try to reach everybody once before we go around a second time. All right, so go ahead.
Karen Clark. I live in Housatonic, right along the river, just up the road from Reed, so I can see the potential dump site in Housatonic from where I live as well, so that's very concerning to me. My question or comment was going to be very similar to the gentleman who just spoke, so I just want to say that I share his interest in that option, partly because I worry about, I've read that there is potential volatile issues of PCBs in the air when they're taken out of the river. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's certainly a question that I have. What are the risks of the removal? I don't want them dumped next to the river. That makes no sense to me either. But I also care about the people that live near wherever they're going to go. I think that we don't want toxic dumps anywhere, really. And I think we should be putting more energy. I mean, there's a lot of smart people in this world that if we were putting, to say there's nothing out there right now, I don't find acceptable. I think we need to put a lot more research and energy into that direction rather than sort of half-heartedly dismissing it, which it feels like right now.
Okay. I think we have a woman back there who hasn't spoken yet. Okay, go ahead.
My name is Barbara Ciaffarini. I am co-founder of Citizens for PCB Removal. And removal is the key word there. We have been advocating, as my husband said, for over 20 years for the removal of PCBs, not only from homeowners' properties, but from the wider watershed, because that is the source, and it makes sense to get rid of it from the source. And I'd like to make the point here that the statements made is they're trying to be protective of human and environmental health, and nobody in this room really knows how dangerous, how bad, how long-term damage these chemicals are. The statement about them degrading every, whatever it was, 3 years or whatever, is ridiculous. That is scientifically proven to be wrong. And there's a lot of scientific literature about that out there if you just search the internet a little bit. Before we got to this point, GE had submitted a series of proposals. I can't remember if it was 9, I think it was 9, 11, something like that, which ranged from do nothing, which they euphemistically called, what was it again? Monitor natural resources. So it's sort of what the other gentleman was suggesting, which we know will not address the issue in any of our lifetimes. To a very draconian, dredge a lot and cost a lot of money, which frankly most of the environmentalists were in favor of because that's how badly we want this out of our river. So the proposal we're working on now that's been in dispute is the lesser of the most draconian approach. But I want to make the point that when the CD was settled, the consent decree, and the environmentalists were all left out, and we literally went to BCC and walked around outside the room where the negotiations were going on and looked in the window and begged to be let in, and they would not let us in. That's how much we wanted to be in there, and that's how much they kept us out. But we were promised that this portion of the CD proposed was delayed so that we could, with the passage of time, that new technologies would come forth, which people are just starting to mention now, and that they would look at them, they would evaluate them, and there was a good chance we were going to use them. Well, now it's 20 years later, and we're still at dredge and landfill. And we don't want that. We don't want the draconian dredging, and we don't want the landfilling. We do want the modern methods. But EPA itself, there's a division of the EPA that has blocked that. EPA is the one saying no to that, not GE. And so I appeal to EPA to keep your promise to us. You made a contract and you told us that part of that contract was you were going to look at alternative methods and you were going to try things, and we proposed bench tests and small tests within the river and so forth, and we just keep getting shot down.
Okay, you've got
So-
to begin to wrap it up. We'll come back to you later
All right,
if you want.
I have one more thing.
Thank you, but we're not ceding time. Go ahead. Thank you.
So, and I have a question to GE
We'll come back
here.
to you. We're not going to cut you off, but we just want to let everybody speak once.
Here's my question to GE, to EPA. If for some reason we get to this point and we do find a, quote, compromise, which as everybody said, the people in this room have already compromised everything we have to compromise. But if we get to this point, we've also been promised since day one that if the standards change and we find we need less PCBs in the environment to be safe, or we find new PCBs, new sources of PCBs, what happens then? Is this so-called mediation going to take GE off the hook forever and ever and take that promise away from us also?
I think Brian can answer that question. I'm going to
All
ask
right,
you to wrap it
and
up.
one more thing I want to say. No resolution is better than a bad resolution now.
Okay. Okay. Where are we? Who's got the microphone? There you go. And your name is?
Chris Windrum. I live in Housatonic, pretty close to where one of the dumps has been proposed for.
Okay.
I would say that historically what we know about this is that General Electric broke the law and put all of our health at risk. It's EPA's charter to protect us, and they have done so to a certain extent, but not to the extent that we wish they would. So I would suggest that any compromise that we would accept is the one that requires GE to clean up the poison so that we don't all continue to suffer from it perpetually. I have a letter here from United States Senator Elizabeth Warren, United States Senator Edward Markey, and our Congressman Richard Neal. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the last two paragraphs, and this is addressed to the EPA. And it says, completing the Housatonic River project is about protecting our environment and public safety. This project is about protecting the health of our families that deserve to be able to fish, hike, and play alongside the river and its banks. We urge the EPA to insist that GE be a responsible corporate neighbor by cleaning the Housatonic River. In doing so, the EPA should respect existing Massachusetts laws regarding toxic waste disposal, hear and respect the concerned voices of Western Massachusetts, and require that the carcinogenic PCBs be deposited in a federal licensed out-of-state disposal site. So, the highest elected officials that we have here in Massachusetts have spoken and given us a unified voice to tell us we need to clean this up and clean it up completely.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Gail Cerisi, and first of all, I would like to thank those who've been following this consistently over the last 25 or 30 years. What I would like to tell you, a while ago when I was younger, one of the representatives for GE said if he had 1% effective change in the way the river was then he did his job. So that's their philosophy. And I would like everyone to know that that's how they feel about it. Secondly, I think removing the PCBs and put them alongside the bank of the river or in the floodplain or just outside the floodplain is like sticking your finger in the dike. It's silly and it's not going to work. And the only resolution that we really can have is to find a way to break the PCBs down. And what I would like to find out is does EPA mandate that GE put a certain amount of this funding or money towards research? And the citizens should be involved in who gets selected to do this research. It shouldn't be in GE's hands to decide that they're going to pay for the research and they're going to select who's doing the research, because basically they're not interested in seeing any change. The gentleman who was working for GE told me that. They don't intend to do anything. The longer they can drag their feet, the more money they save. So I think there's a flaw in our system. And I don't really know all the channels. I'm not a legal person, but it seems to me that there should be some kind of mandate for research out there. There's children who have solved getting rid of plastics in the ocean. There's people out there that have come up with really great ideas. I'm not that person, but they're out there, and we should be searching for those people and putting money into that research. I can't tell you how much funding goes for cancer research or, different disease research. Why can't we put money into that venue?
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think the microphone's over here somewhere.
Yep. Dennis Regan. I work for the Housatonic Valley Association. We're a watershed nonprofit group. Wonderful comments tonight, and I hope people are listening. There were a few comments about doing more research and doing some more investigating, but I firmly feel that EPA has been working for the last 25 years or so doing that research. We know how bad this toxic waste is in the Housatonic River. We know we should get rid of this stuff. People have difference of opinion. Some don't want to destroy the river in a short term to negate the long-term benefit, and that's their opinion. But I think that we should pick up and take out and remediate this contaminated toxic substance in our river. We should do it as soon as we can. We have an opportunity right now to do it with EPA here negotiating for the last 25 years. if we wait any longer, we could run into a situation where, such like Tim mentioned, in the Hudson River, where they went and they developed a plan, did what they thought was remediation, and all of a sudden realized when they were finished that, nah, we missed it. We missed the boat. There's still PCBs in there, and those PCBs will probably stay there for a long time. We and a lot of people here, as you can hear, don't necessarily agree with the with the plan that EPA came out with. I think that EPA has they don't work in a fishbowl. They have to negotiate and work with different communities and politics. So I think their plan that is out now is a compromise agreement already. A lot of us don't like parts of it, but we do like some of the parts. Some of the parts that I think are good. One is that there is an opening for adaptive management. If there is a technology that is developed that will take and remediate the PCBs on site, that's a blessing. Let's do it. Everybody's for that. I tend to agree with EPA that there may not be something out there to clean up the types of PCBs that we have in our river, and that's a shame. Whoever does develop something like that they're going to make a lot of money, and God bless them. I hope they do it soon. The other part of the plan that I do like is that there will be shipping out the PCBs off-site. It's not going to stay in our area. The way that I interpret what the Public Access Board said was that we agree with your plan, but we want you to go back and reinvestigate and re-examine the landfill situation. I think you had made a comment that the Public Access Board said, no, we don't want to do that.
No, I didn't mean that.
Okay, that's what I heard.
I didn't mean
but
to
I
say
think
that.
I'm glad that it's just an opportunity for EPA to review that situation. And I think you're hearing from comments tonight, which is the purpose of this meeting, is to hear the public, and we're providing those comments.
Sure.
And I think most of us feel that we've been compromising for 25 years. So enough compromising, let's just go do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Over here, there's a mic. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Susan May from Lenox, and people have said some wonderful things tonight. I won't repeat them. I'd like to go on record and say how that I don't think people who live outside the area know what a beautiful place the Berkshires is to live in, to visit. I could not understand why Governor Baker gave GE so many tax breaks to come into the eastern part of the state without negotiating something for what's going on out here. I think he does not know what the Berkshires are, because people who do know that it's a very special place. I was not born here, but I chose to live here because it is beautiful. It has a quality of life that can't be surpassed between the arts and nature and the beautiful landscapes that we have and the abundance of parks and outdoor recreation. It's just a very, very special place. So in addition to that personal feeling that I have and many people here have, there's also the economics of it. I've seen statistics from Williams College, and I don't remember numbers, but our county is so highly dependent on tourism. When GE left Pittsfield, that was the manufacturing of the county. It left no good jobs, no manufacturing, no good industry for people. So the alternative has been to sell this beautiful place for people to come and visit. There are hotels being built, retreats and spas, you name it, all to bring in people so that we can have some economy going on in this area. For the Lenox Chamber of Commerce to try to market this town while PCBs are being landfilled in the town is just, it just doesn't fly. So I just want people like yourself. You're from DC. You might not, especially this time of year, you might not realize how beautiful this place is, how very special it is. And I think that's what motivates a lot of us to have this point of view. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With the microphone somewhere over here. Oh, you got it. Go for it.
Yep. Is it on?
Yeah. Just hold it near your mouth.
Okay. Never mind.
Oh, I bet you got something on your mind.
Are you sure you don't want to?
Okay. All right, over here.
Come on, you're not shy.
Go
I
ahead.
saw you talking about it.
We'll give you another chance in a minute.
Hello, my name's Chris Tim Payne, and I live at 12 School Street in Lenoxdale. And short and sweet, I have a couple of questions. Number one, I'd like to know, from what I've heard and read, I feel like it's more the money that GE doesn't want to spend to take it out. But how much money has GE spent fighting to take it out? You know? Where's their bottom line? How much have they put down already to fight this when it probably would have paid for half of it already? Number two, I would like to say that I don't hear people much talking. You have these dump sites, but the dump sites are not open fields. They're chainsaws. They're clearing land, right? How much land? You're going to bring in chainsaws and wipe out the trees and clear a whole lot of property to make these dump sites, which nobody here wants. That's about all I have to really say.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Patrick White. I live in Stockbridge. My dad bought his house there in 1960. One of the things I think we need to recognize is that there's not going to be a perfect solution, but there is a jobs issue here in the Berkshires. Whether they're talking about spending $200 million or $600 million, there's a tremendous amount of jobs that could come to the Berkshires as part of this cleanup, and I don't think we should let them off the hook to just litigate another 20 years, because there's entire generations of young people who are not deciding to stay here in the Berkshires because they can't find good work, and getting going on this cleanup, even if it's a compromise, might help a lot of these people find good jobs. And I would just encourage us to bring a resolution to the table so that we can get some of those lost GE jobs back and get people to work.
Okay. Thank you. Interesting thoughts. Okay, over here.
Yeah. My name's Jack. I live in Housatonic, kind of right up the way from Reed there. I've lived there pretty much my whole life, and I had dogs. They played in the river, swam. I don't know what they did, ate stuff, whatever. I put them both to sleep with big tumors all over their body. Now I have a dog that I walk across the river from Reed's place, where the dump site is proposed. And some people have said that they're going to clean the river, they're not going to get everything out. Now they're going to put it on the bank of where I walk the dog. So now I can't let my dogs play in the river, can't let my kids swim in the river, now I can't even walk my dog on the river. That does not seem like a pretty good compromise to me.
Okay. Where are we? Who's got the
Hello.
microphone?
Hello. Right here. My name is Luke. I live in Great Barrington. Grew up here. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out. I'm holding a lot of different truths around strategy, and I'm also just want to honor that the need that I'm hearing around here, there's a need for caring and caring about this place, and I appreciate that might be connecting us all. As far as some of the strategies that I'm holding, I appreciate the need around job security, though a job in doing something I don't believe in a cleanup method, I can't say I support that. And I'm not here to like cause little rifts everywhere. Sending the waste out to Texas, I don't think I can support that either. There's a class component to that West Texas is just going to be carrying this burden here. About innovative technology, this is conventional thought that is saying there's no innovative technology, and so I'm not going to believe that. I even think there's some potential hiding in our vilification of invasive plants, that the little zebra mussels filter 7 gallons per minute of water, and every chance a natural reaction happens is a chance that PCBs get broken down. Just like this gentleman here said, there is a half-life, though that's completely dependent on the rate of reaction happening. And then I want to connect this to a social justice component, which is now just starting to bubble up right now, that people are being able to connect things like climate change and now calling it climate justice, where reparations go directly to the people who are most vulnerable and have been the most vulnerable. So what would it look like to take that $613 million and give it to the poorest people in our town and call it a day and say, yeah, I'm not saying that's what I totally believe in, and I'm not saying there's one truth, but something I could put my heart around, I would like that buy-in too. So thanks for listening.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike from Pittsfield, and I wanted to point out that the fellow who couldn't get to the river through the chain link fence in Pittsfield earlier was trying to get to the cleaned river, not to a dirty part of the river or an unclean part. And the solution to this should allow access to the river for the full length of the cleanup. We should not be cleaning it to a level where it still needs a fence. In addition, the Berkshire Valley is also called the Marble Valley. The rock underneath is limestone. It's porous, soluble, and the water flows through it as well as it does through the gravel banks along the shore.
Right here. Right there.
Okay. Is it on?
It is.
I'm Thelma Barzatini from Pittsfield, Massachusetts. I belong to Citizens with the PCB removal. I really don't have a question. I just want to make a statement.
Go ahead.
More or less. I've been in this over more than 30 years, the PCB removals and the PCBs, and they keep telling me that the world advances and that changes and things get better. I just don't understand in this world why they don't have the technology to destroy it. I'm going to lean. And I certainly don't want a toxic waste dump. They've failed. We've had the ones in Pittsfield. They absolutely have been problems. I just don't know where this is all going. As I say, by this time in my life, I thought they'd have come up with something. The EPA is in they're trying to find ways, but I think as the time goes on, they're just going to change things, even though they tried to say no toxic waste dumps. I certainly don't want one. And I don't want liners put in. We've got to remove it. It's the people's health. Like everybody said, it's their health. I could go on, but I'm not going to. But I don't want a toxic waste dump. And the people before me that are very knowledgeable, Mr. Gray, Mr. Stokes, Valerie, the people, Mr. Waslowski, all these people have been in these issues for years. So that's all I've got to say. I hope that the EPA will stand their ground or make the GE, after all, they are the people who caused the problem, they should pay to remove it. So I thank everybody for coming. I'm glad to see so many interested people.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead, sir.
Hi, my name's Bob Neeson. I live in Lee. It seems to me it's a $250 million football. And it would seem to me that if GE spent their legal dollars and on looking at innovative technologies, rather than fighting the cleanup of the river, if they wanted to reduce the cost of the $250 million to truck it to West Texas in a desert, then perhaps they would spend some money looking at alternative technologies. The answer is not for us to sacrifice more, it's for them to step up and do the right thing.
Okay. Thank you for the comment. This side. Okay.
Hi, my name is Fiora Elena. I live in Lenox, and I'm going to say, I was just about to say pretty much what you just said. Our mediator says we're here for more options, right? We keep talking about we're dredging and dumping here, or we're dredging and dumping somewhere else, and no one can really agree that those are either good options. And then we just sit here arguing over which one is the better of the two, which both seem equally pretty terrible to me. And I want to know really, like, how much money, time, and energy have we invested in coming up with alternative options? How many scientists do we have working on this? Have we given this to a university? I mean, we are living in the 21st century. I mean, let's not be ridiculous. If you look at the technology we're coming up with, I mean, we created this evil. It's only a matter of time before we figure out something that will be a better option. I just don't think we've actually put in enough energy.
Okay. Thank you. And then...
Hi, Mark. I live here. This is a terrible situation, and you know, I think we're going to end up with some situation. You're working on it. It could get tied up for a long time. So the idea to take it to Texas, very costly. That's a certified dump. Okay, well then, or then dump it on the riverbank. Not a certified dump, but somehow okay. But the problem is taking it out of the river and dumping it where they're planning on dumping it. It's sort of like around here dumping it on Main Street. And it's like, well, don't dump it on Main Street, dump it somewhere else. And if you could just dig a hole next to the river, well, you could dig a hole somewhere else. I'm not really for this idea, but I know in a situation like this that something's just going to happen. And it's either really bad or not too bad. And at least don't put it right on Main Street, which is the river. Put it, go a little further away, somewhere else. I mean, it's like saying, oh, we're going to take it out of the river and put it in your backyard. Well, we don't want it in our backyard, but maybe, you know, just somewhere else.
Okay, got it.
You know, yeah. And I think we're dealing with a system that's, it's not broken, it's a fixed system.
Okay. In the back.
Hi, Ann O'Dwyer. I live in Housatonic. And I agree. I don't like the prospect of dumping here. I don't like the prospect of dumping somewhere else. I agree with Tim. I think we really haven't explored the other options that are possible. And, you know, I guess I'm finding myself thinking, you know, we need jobs here too. What about developing a center for innovative technologies for dealing with environmental issues? Make the Berkshires a place where we really start to be innovative. I just think that would be a possibility. But I do think just taking the PCBs and shipping them to another poorer community with even less resources than us is not the way to go.
Okay. This side. Go ahead.
Yes, hello. My name is Pat. I live in Egremont. And I'd like to respond to a comment that you made earlier. If I understood correctly, you were suggesting that the prospect of long-term litigation and thereby leaving the waste in our rivers might be a motivation for achieving a compromise or a settlement through this current process. And I'd just like to say that, in my opinion, that doesn't really hold water. Either way, if we allow the waste to be dumped alongside of our rivers, where it will continue to be toxic to our environment and leach back into the river, it's not all that different from the long-term prospect of it sitting there.
Okay.
So that is not really a motivation for us to compromise, in my opinion.
Okay. Back on this side. All right. I think there's still people over here that haven't spoken before I come back to people that already have had a chance.
Yeah, my name's, oh, sorry.
Where are you?
I'm way in the back.
Okay, got it.
I don't have a statement. I have a question. I don't know whether the EPA is available to answer a question. Is that part of this or not?
I'm sorry, what's your name?
Sorry, my name's Don Marcus. I live in Egremont.
Well, why don't you ask the question? I can't answer for EPA.
Well, I would like to know, aside from this forum in which we get to express ourselves and some meaningful people get to hear what we have to say, is there any other way in which our voices can have any kind of impact on this process?
Yeah, well, you may not have been here at the very beginning, but this is not the only time. If there is progress made towards a possible compromise, which I think the majority of people in this room think is impossible, but if that happened, then there'd be future meetings in which something more substantive would be brought and people could react to it.
Well, I'm, with all due respect, I'm not really talking about that. Okay. I think that I, and maybe some other people in this room, are worried by the initial remarks made by the gentleman from the EPA that somehow, particularly in the current political climate, that their standing in this fight, which is what it is being compromised somehow, and that I think I and possibly others in this room would like to do something to buttress them. Letters from the community, from businesses, from institutions, from arts organizations. Are these kinds of things useful to you to help you hold the line? The EPA.
Do you want to tackle that? I mean, I have some thoughts, but you probably are in a better place.
Now, that's a tough question. I will tell you that I'm in charge of the cleanup program for New England, and I don't feel, this mediation was brought on from myself and other people that have been working on this project for a really long time. We feel really strongly that if there's a better solution, we should look for it. The litigation is not guaranteed the outcome of that, so we have to consider that. I don't think we've talked that much about that tonight, but we have to consider what the outcome of our litigation is. We'll say, we're sure we're going to win, and if you ask GE, they'll say they're sure they're going to win, but none of us, it's not going to be our ultimate decision if we go down the litigation path. So I feel like I have great support for what we're doing, and we're working really hard on the response to the Environmental Appeals Board right now. As we're going through this mediation process, we also have people working on the other side of the process. So there's two tracks, and we'll be ready to go if there isn't another solution that we feel like and the community feels like is better than the one that we're going down through litigation. But we have to recognize that we're not 100% sure we're going to win. We're never sure of that.
Is there anything that we can do to support the effort?
I think we're hearing you loud and clear tonight, I think, and our office is going to hear you. The people in Washington will hear what we heard today. I thought there were have been lots of great opinions here, and it's pretty clear, what people would want. No one wants a landfill in their backyard. I can tell you that from working on hundreds of sites around the country, around New England. No one wants it, as people said, people in Texas don't want it. Our decision so far has been to take the material out of state, and that has been our decision. We haven't changed our minds on that. However, we're also looking to see if there are other solutions besides that. There are lots of things that stand in the way of other solutions, and we're trying to to see if there's any way that we can get past some of those things, some of those obstacles. Well, there are legal issues, for one, for different locations. There are certain legal issues, and I don't want to get into details about it, but there are legal obstacles that get in the way. There are community acceptance is one of our criteria, or one of the things that we look at in terms of our criteria. And there are technical issues that a lot of people raised tonight that we would have to get past if we got to some other solution. But again, EPA is moving forward right now, and we're trying to protect kids like that. Our job is to protect the public out here, and we take that really, really seriously. And I've been working on this site. I was out here 28 years ago, almost as long as Thelma, and Tim and others. And, you know, I spent the first 12 years of my career out here, canoeing the river. There's no more beautiful place in the world that I've been than sitting in the river in Lenox, just above Woods Pond there with, you know, at one point a bear came up over the tall grass right next to my canoe. I almost fell out of the canoe, but I've never experienced anything like out here, and we've spent a lot of time out here. So, and many of us on our team have. So I do want you to know that that part of it is not lost in us. The Berkshires are a very special place, and we're trying to look for a solution that's better than the one that we have in the litigation path now. There may not be one, right? But we wanted to come here and listen to what people had to say to see if there is possibly a solution.
Okay. Who's got the mic over there in the back?
I do. Hi, I'm Judy Eddy. I'm from West Stockbridge, and I'm on the board of the Berkshire Environmental Action Team, and I'm a member of a number of other groups in the Berkshires. And, you know, it's really hard for me to, I'm just so angry. Like, I just get so angry that I feel sick. And I appreciate the EPA employees. First of all, thank you for sticking with the EPA today in this environment. Thank you for still working there. Really, the job you have now has got to be so hard. And to me, it's the Environmental Protection Agency. It's not the GE Protection Agency. It's about the environment. Yes, it's about human health as well. But you know, it's just so frustrating, as everyone knows, to look to us now, and there are, of course, really skilled people in this audience who are involved in the CCC group and are involved in the mediation, and thank you for that. But to look for, like, the average person to come up with the answers tonight is ridiculous. We're all saying the same thing because we're all feeling the same thing. We're angry and frustrated. Okay, and yes, there's this toxic stuff. We don't know what to do with it. No one knows what to do with it. GE should pay through the nose for the best possible solution. There should be no compromise on that. We've been compromising for years. I think it's ridiculous that the EPA is fighting against their own EPA appeals board. They're like, you know, why should they have to negotiate with themselves? To me, it's just ridiculous and absurd that we're here doing this still tonight. So I'm sorry to be so, you know, upset, but I just am shaking with sorrow and upset. My son is going to be 22. We moved here when he was 7. I didn't know about the PCBs in the river. We went on a canoe ride and saw the signs. It's devastating to realize you can't touch your own environment. And the idea of digging it up is heartbreaking too. But if we do, it should go to a licensed facility wherever the EPA says that is, and these guys have said the best answer, and now they're fighting against their own people. It's just absurd. They came up with a solution, and now we're again reconsidering it.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
I know that this woman's been has had her hand up for a very long time. So, Kelsey, let's try to get down here. She's had her hand up for like half an hour.
Well, thanks. Well, my name is Uli Nagel. I live in Lee. I was born in Germany, but I've lived here for a little over 20 years. I was just wondering if you've ever looked at Germany as an example, because it's actually cleared up all its rivers, and even the Rhine, who, you know, had all this chemical stuff flowing down through it from Bayer and whatever, you can actually swim in it now. So I know that this kind of miracle's possible, and I trust that you're nodding your head, so you have looked into it, obviously. Too bad. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I have.
I want to clarify something I said before on the treatment of PCBs. So there are lots of universities and, you know, very smart people, much smarter than I, that could take these types of PCBs and put them in a laboratory and mix them with different chemicals and break them down. However, once you put them in, mix them with soil, mix them with sediment, put them in the bottom of a river, and even after you take them out in that mixture, that's the part that makes it more difficult to have an actual solution that can work in a river like this. So that is the problem. It's not that science can't. I agree that if you can make something, you can also break it down. But these are much harder to break down, and once you get them in that mixture, it makes it very difficult to come up with an actual solution that will work in the field. So that's the issue. We do have lots of money, lots of people. EPA, I'm talking about, have people working on these types of issues all the time. Our Office of Research and Development, we have dozens of universities around the country that actually get paid through our Superfund program to do this kind of research. And we continue to follow that. So for those people, we did say that we would continue to look at these types of treatment technologies last time around. And Barbara, we haven't stopped doing that. But there just hasn't been anything that can work in the field yet. There are things that can work in the laboratory, but not things that can work in the field. So thank you.
I have one question. First,
have you spoken already?
I have already.
Right, then we need to let other people speak first. Because Tim's also had his hand up for 20 minutes, and I'm going to recognize him after we hear from everyone once.
I was just hoping to speak, ask a question of the EPA. Somebody said that it volatilizes in the air. Somebody said it doesn't, which would mean it can spread through the air. Is that right? Does it, in fact, spread through the air? Okay. That's what I thought, but somebody said it didn't.
I'll answer it more specifically. So it does volatilize. Everything volatilizes. Some things volatilize more than others. These types of PCBs don't volatilize very much, but they do volatilize. And it depends on the concentration that you have. So if you have really high levels of PCBs, you could have some volatilization. Lower levels, you have less volatilization. And it's actually different types of PCBs that are volatilizing than the ones that are actually in that mixture. So it's very complicated, but it does happen. And at some, in some situations, like, for instance, at the old GE plant site, there might have been more volatilization coming off those vats or off the transformers that are full of the liquid than, we might have coming off the sediments in the river.
So let me just see, Tim, I know your hand's up. I will call on you after everybody's been called on. Let me see a show of hands of people who have not spoken yet. 1, 2, 3. There's still quite a few. So let's hear from everybody once, and then we'll go around. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Elaine, and I'm a renter in Lenox. I was at the meeting a couple of years ago with a scientist who came down to Great Barrington who talked about that issue. He talked about that they're studying this and that you should live 3 miles away from the river because the PCBs are getting into the air, and they've studied it, and it's harming people, especially at the concentration at Woods Pond. And he also talked about the best way to remove the PCBs, which is not in the summer, where they're dredging all the soil and leaving it in a big pile, and it's evaporating, and the humidity spreads it all around, and all our young people and all of us will be breathing it in, and that the best time to do it is in the winter time. So that's my real concern, because what he was saying is once you disturb the PCBs, once you pile the soil up, then we're spreading the PCBs around, and you're actually making the area more toxic for 15 years. So if I have a 15-year-old, 15 years from now is 30. That means in her prime, maternity years, she'll be having a child in a very toxic area. So my concern is, yes, where are we dumping all these PCBs? And yes, I would like to be in a licensed facility. Not sure that's going to be right next to the river, but how it's being removed, because at that point, once they start removing it, then I might be moving out of the area. And I do know what he said, what happened in Pittsfield was really not optimal, and that a lot of people were exposed unnecessarily in Pittsfield when they were dredging.
Okay. By the way, I don't know if everybody can see, but the folks over here from EPA are taking copious notes of what you're saying, so you really are being heard here.
Thank you.
Okay. Over on the left there.
Hi.
Your name is?
I'm Mary Beth. I live in Lenox. I tried to do a little bit of research before coming tonight to see what I could learn about sediment placed in containment facilities once it's been dredged up, and found something about the city of Tacoma and their cleanup of the Foss waterway. Now, they had a $105 million cleanup plan. The state was on the hook for about 25% of that, for $28 million. Maybe that's why the state's not here tonight. I don't know. And there were the responsible parties were only on the hook for 12% of that total cost, which was about $13 million. And so my concern primarily is who's going to pay for this? Like, what's going to happen for Lenox? What's going to happen for Lee? What's going to happen for Housatonic? There's got to be some remuneration to the places that have been contaminated, and I hope that that's taken into consideration during, mediation.
Okay. Okay. For the impacts of the cleanup. Okay. All right.
Lee Davis from Great Barrington. Actually wasn't going to speak tonight, but I just want to speak to the GE, and I'm always trying to find different ways to really see from different perspectives. And what I'm taking from this is there's a $250 million gap in terms of the money. And if we bring it down to the money, what could GE do to make this negative into a positive? So you can see really the community census that we all feel very, very strongly that we need to get rid of this and we need to move it out of our community. So if you think of how can we turn this into a community initiative that GE can save itself, that they can make this into a moment, a PR moment, a $250 million gap that you can turn it in and they could bring job creation. They can show that they actually care about the environment, that they actually make this negative that they've caused in this community into a positive, because they actually have created jobs here. They have a history of creating jobs in GE, and unfortunately this is what's left of those jobs. So what I speak to GE is, is there a creative solution that you can turn this $250 million gap that you say it's too expensive and say this could be a $250 million PR campaign, and let's, bring jobs into the community. Let's bring the schools around and bring the community back to our side. So I really think that there's some strategy, there's some way of turning this negative into a positive. So I really ask GE to see that we're very, very passionate about what we feel and hear us and do something about it, but use it to help yourself. So that's my point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, who else hasn't spoken yet? Right back. Where? Okay.
My name is Dominic Villani. I'm a Lanesboro resident, and I moved here in 1996. Most of my business is in Pittsfield, and I do recall seeing Brian very often way back then, and I thought I would actually spend more time and energy on this particular issue. And thank you, Tim, and so many other folks here. I do have a few questions, and I would like to say I have been very angry, even up to 2 minutes ago, but trying to raise the bar, as they say, and keep it up there. I do believe there's a way, a best way forward. I really do. For instance, one fact of the matter is GE has changed their leadership. I don't know if this new CEO would actually come out, perhaps have dinner and on the town, in the town, perhaps next to the river.
On the town, in the town, next to the river. Okay.
So some technical questions, and I do apologize. I was late. I did not catch the first portion of your explanation, perhaps, of why we're here tonight. But the reason I'm here is I am a member of a few organizations, and with the emails today, you don't miss much. But having the time to assemble your thoughts and come up with creative, doable solutions that takes time. And I've spent most of my time just trying to make a living. It's been difficult. I would like to know tonight who is, if anyone, present representing General Electric. And how long have you been with General Electric? Are you an attorney for General Electric or?
Yeah. I know you came in
No,
late.
I'm trying.
I understand. I know you came in late, so let me just explain. So I asked GE to come to listen, but I promised that they would not be answering questions or responding to comments tonight. There'll be opportunities in the future when we'll put substantive things forward. Tonight was 1, to describe the process, 2 was to receive input, and 3, we were going to try to limit comments to about 4 minutes, but since you weren't here, I'd like you to get your questions out.
Okay, so.
But we were supposed to limit everybody to 4 minutes, but go ahead.
Okay. So what I was saying earlier about trying to formulate my own thoughts.
Go ahead.
So the relevance of someone that represents GE, I believe, can be somewhat relevant, certainly for me. So apologize.
Okay.
Would you mind answering that question? Would you mind answering that question? The question is, are you an attorney for GE? And how long have you, oh, excellent. And how long have you been employed by GE?
I was hired for this project about 16, 17 years ago.
Okay, that's a good thing. I believe that's good. Okay. Okay, I will. And with the new leadership,
He can't respond to questions. This isn't an opportunity. Let me just be clear.
Okay.
This isn't an opportunity to ask GE questions. I'm going to ask you to summarize your comments in the next 30 seconds so that we can get around to everybody once, and then we can come back to you. Okay?
Thank you.
So I'll give you 30 seconds, okay,
Thank you.
if you can.
Now, another question. Is there anyone from Congressman Neal's office here tonight?
I have no idea.
Okay. Thank you. Anyway,
Okay.
I'd like to see a industrious cleanup.
All right. Thank you. Okay. This gentleman here hasn't spoken. Let me see hands. There's a mic out there. Okay. Go ahead. You got the mic.
Nick Peck. I'm from Stockbridge, Mass. And I'd just like to say that, in my view, the mediation committee is lacking one important constituency, which is normally lacking in our society, which is children. Now, children have a natural ability at justice, and they're also unable to be unfairly influenced a lot of times. And I guess I'm saying this because I feel as though if there had been a committee of children in Pittsfield at the time that General Electric began making its decision to dump the PCBs in the river, the children would have thought about this and said, no. And the second thing they might have said is, why don't you buy some very thick-walled stainless steel drums and put all your PCBs in those drums while we help you figure out what to do with them? So my idea is that you get kids involved in the mediation, and that our community also makes sure that children are incorporated in the attack dog team that ends up dealing in court in the litigation, which I think is a 60% chance that'll happen. So the kids are represented in that forum also.
Okay, thank you.
Denny Alsop, Stockbridge.
Okay.
I have canoed twice across Massachusetts in regards to rivers. The first time was 30 years ago. And at that point, the Housatonic was regarded as sort of, a place you didn't want to go. There were chain link fences up and signs all over the place saying danger and stuff like that. But there was something good going on, and that was when President Nixon was in the White House during the Vietnam War, and people were marching around the White House, and their famous story is that he turned to Henry Kissinger at his side and said, "Henry, are they going to come in and get us?" and that's when we got the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act, and that's when we got the EPA. So to answer the question of the gentleman who was in the back of the room, our political actions matter and are heard, and they're heard in Washington, and sometimes they're even heard in Boston, but there seems to be a really muffled drum in Boston. You know, somebody asked earlier, why is the DEP being so, you know, circumspect? Where are they? You know, isn't this their, you know, their bailiwick? When I was crossing Massachusetts by canoe the first time, I got over the height of land and I was going down the Westfield River and I was really exhausted, and a guy appeared at the riverbank, and he waved me over, and you know, there I was under the railroad tracks when the river was roaring, and I went over and I said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm a Mohican Indian. I'm a member of the Stockbridge Band." And I said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "I'm here to see if you're real, if you're for real." Okay?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And,
Okay.
and we are for real. You guys are for real. We're for real. We're coming from our hearts. Thank you for being here and for listening to us. We appreciate that. And thank you to the EPA. It's not hopeless, the situation. I think that Boston needs a push, a big push. Not only is the DEP maybe not here, I don't know, but what about the Department of Public Health? I mean, they've dropped the ball. Okay, I'll give up the mic. Thank you for the opportunity.
Good evening. Ron Blumenthal. I've lived here since the early 90s, and I will ask a question you don't have to answer, which is, what's more reviled? Who is more reviled than lawyers? Venture capitalists. Hello, everyone. And I will say, as a very quiet venture capitalist representing a number of other venture capitalists, there will be no intelligent investment here in Berkshire County without the PCBs leaving. So if you're concerned about jobs and the future here, that is a very big thing to consider. So thank you,
Okay.
and I've come out now.
Okay. I wrote it down. Thank you. All right. Have we exhausted all the... have you spoken? You've spoken. You haven't spoken. You spoke. You haven't spoken. Give this gentleman a microphone.
Thank you very much. My name's Sal Angelo. I'm from Lee. The gentleman that started the conversation earlier this evening, he mentioned something that seems quite obvious to me. I don't understand why Monsanto isn't involved in this program. I don't understand why EPA hasn't gotten in touch with Monsanto and said, hey, we need $250 million. It's your fault. You designed this. Now, you're talking about chemical engineers. There is no better place to learn about having chemical engineers design it. I'm sorry. Monsanto has the best chemical engineers on the face of this planet. If something had to be redesigned, all right, Monsanto would be able to do it. GE should want Monsanto involved in this because they designed this program, this chemical. So that's basically, I can't understand why Monsanto's not involved.
Because I know that, let me get to the front of the mic. I'd like to go through a second round of people who want to speak, starting with Tim. But I do know that before we end at 8:30, I've been told that Brian would like to say a few words. And before you go around with the second round, I really appreciate how well everybody has expressed themselves tonight. I think it's been very helpful. I hope people feel like they've had a chance to say what they want to say, and I can tell you that everybody's listening. Me, EPA, GE, so thank you. Tim. We have one more hand. I'm sorry I missed you. I apologize. My fault. You were hiding.
I attended that meeting about a year or so ago at the Lenox Town Hall. I attended a meeting at Lenox Town Hall about a year ago. The issue was airborne PCBs, where evidence was shown that the concentration of PCBs in the air is very high along the river. I live alongside the river for 30 years with my children. I've been breathing PCBs all this time. And the issue also was, just consider what happens when you dig up all the sediment, bring it up out of the river, what happens to the PCBs in the air, just thousandfold. And a lot of people live along the river. And they'll be breathing the PCBs. That's a consideration.
I just wanted to comment on some scientific things that have been thrown out here tonight, which are not true. Okay, because I think it's important to keep the scientific knowledge in your sights. If you're studying this, it's very important. And the first thing that I heard was that that PCBs have a 17-year half-life. That's totally not true. Okay. The half-life is still out to debate over different scientists. That's what the truth is they're debating it. Some of the scientists are saying it'll be here for 10,000 years. Now, the 17-year thing, it's been in the river for 45, 50 years already. Hasn't gone away yet, so it doesn't go away in 17. We can at least come away from this meeting agreeing to that. The other thing that I wanted to say is that there is a reason that EPA, and not just EPA, but pretty much every civilized country around the world are cleaning up their PCBs, okay? And it's really PCBs, you have to understand, it's our river, it's us, we suck it in. It does volatilize. The EPA has many studies out now that admits it volatilizes. When we first started at HRI, they told us it doesn't volatilize. Then we tested the homes of the people right next to the river, and every living room had PCBs inside the room. So the volatilization thing has been decided. It's in the air, and we're sucking it in. Dr. Carpenter, who was the one who gave that meeting about a year ago, when we asked him, so what do? Do you take it out of the river? Are we going to get exposed during the cleanup? And he said, yeah. You will be exposed, and you'll probably be exposed a little more than you're getting by living next to the river. But it will be a one-time exposure, and much better than living your entire life along the river and cleaning up. So that's important. The other thing I wanted to clean up is that PCBs are now a recognized carcinogen. It happened about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, where the World Health Organizations around the world came together, they studied it, and they kind of decided it was time to notch it from a probable carcinogen, which GE has sat on for many years and loved that, okay, to the fact that it's a known carcinogen. The other thing that's important, and I'll stop because, again, I can go on forever. PCBs, what's that? Sorry. PCBs, if you read scientific literature, you will find out that they are connected to cancers, they are connected to thyroid issues, they are connected to cancer in kids, reproductive issues in kids. They've studied the Mohawk Nation up along the river up there in northern New York, and all the kids have severe learning disabilities and things like that by growing up in a PCB. Of course, they're eating the fish. This is an Indian tribe, by the way. They're eating the fish, and it's very problematic. But the point being is that if you get on, and if you have trouble finding this, give me a call. And I have a bibliography of about 45 pages right now that will tell you how many PCB studies have been done, and a lot of them are about kids and about cancers and about other things in our neighborhood. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. There's a lot of that along the river corridor. So my point just being is that these PCBs are very bad. EPA is not here trying to push this on us because they think it's, that it's not bad, because they do know it's bad. They're here to do that, and we appreciate. We've had a sort of a love-hate relationship with EPA over the years and had to battle back and forth with them. But we appreciate they're here, and we hope this community can come together and really push for what's the right cleanup for us, not what these other people are making decisions for us, because we're going to come away with a crappy cleanup if we let them do it.
Tim, I appreciate the resource you are for everybody, so thank you. You wanted to speak, right? Go ahead. Okay. All right. Go ahead.
I apologize.
You have a couple questions.
No, actually.
No.
Earlier, I did want to touch on the fact that my business was primarily in Pittsfield. I did witness to what the gentleman over there, the investor, was talking about, the economic fact and facts, historical, overwhelming, and I would describe it as an economic destruction of Pittsfield particularly. But because Pittsfield is so large and in the heart of the Berkshires, it had even a larger effect economically. All right, so this would be addressed to the principals and to please take that into consideration, that already has happened as a part of the destruction, not to mention the natural environment being able to produce more economic capacity and vitality in the true sense of what that emblem up there is. Anyway, the health aspects of the economics, again, truly in an economic standpoint, we need to try to convince General Electric to consider in a heartfelt way, in a heartfelt dimension, and it brings upon a certain material. I'm trying to bring. Very good. Thank you. I apologize.
So any of this cleanup is going to involve dredging, is that correct? What we're talking, one of the possibilities, it's dredging. Do we have any idea of what Connecticut's position is on dredging upriver? Because as I knew it several years back, Connecticut was going to really take a very strong stance against that. Do you have any comments on that? Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. The other question, Brian, you mentioned about the different arrow claws, and yes, the ones that they used at GE Pittsfield, the 1260s, are notoriously hard to for microbiological degradation. But about 30 years ago, Donna Bedard, and yes, it's the same Bedard, did research, GE Schenectady. She was looking at the lower chlorinated arrow chlors, and the argument that came back was See, she's shown that they degrade. Let's leave them in place. 30 years. We did the Manhattan Project in 2 years. If we go to litigation, it could take decades. And as you've said, EPA has some fantastic labs still in Athens, in Research Triangle. GE still has some fantastic scientists working for it. You could solve this. This could be solved. Not easy, and it'll take, it'll take some real dedication. It is an alternative, Brian. It can be done. I think it was something that Tim wanted to do a couple of years back. These are hard air cores. Several decades back, somebody had 4 drums in Woods Pond. Who was that? Was that EPA? Was that GE? What was the outcome of that? You had them in the hot spots where the 1260 is. No, I'm saying that the alternative here is what other people have said.
I hear you.
And it is a technical alternative with a time limit.
I don't think we're going to solve it tonight. I think the point has been made. Let me just comment. The point has been made that a number of you have said, with enough energy, with enough expertise, there's a technological alternative that hasn't been used, identified. And I hear you. I'd like to move on just because I think you've made your point, unless there's something else you want to say.
I think it's a time question. If we go to litigation, this has been going on for 40 years. Many of us in this room aren't going to be here in another 40. And if we go towards litigation, that is what could happen easily. You have a technical possible solution here.
You made that point.
And I think also the question about holding Monsanto culpable. When PCBs were developed, they were being used for immersion microscopes in every college lab, every biology lab. Nobody knew what the dangers of PCBs were. And the other possibility, too, is the co-contaminants in the 1260s, the dioxins and the furans.
Okay.
And I think you know about those, too.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for still being here. Charlie Cianfarini, Citizens for PCB Removal. My aspect is a little bit more towards history. I grew up on Edison Avenue. Across the river, directly across from Lakewood Park, was what we used to call Puff the Magic Dragon. Down below Pittsfield is an aquifer that we can't use because it's contaminated with PCB oil. And GE was allowed to put in this thermal deoxidizer to burn off, to bring up the PCBs and burn them off and get rid of them. And all it was a dioxin plume that went up into the air and settled in Lakewood. It got closed down, and the reason it got closed down was because GE was bringing in PCBs from other parts of the state and other parts of the country to burn off. They stopped bringing the stuff up from underneath Pittsfield and were using it to make money for themselves by bringing it from somewhere else. That's GE's, that's one of the ways that GE works. And it's nice to see Andy and Rod. We haven't seen them in a while. They don't come to the CCC meetings anymore. They don't have to. They're settled. Everything's all right. But, I always enjoyed them and talking with them.
Okay.
And one other thing. 20 years ago, when Brian was a young man, we sat we were in the chambers of the city of Pittsfield at City Hall, and it was a big meeting. And one of the discussions was a parking lot that was adjacent to the river that they were taking up PCB oil from. And the decision at the time, and this was right next to Dave Gibbs' house, by the way, with the chain link fence. One of the decision at the time was we were just going to blacktop over that parking lot again and everything would be safe. And at the time, my 12-year-old daughter asked Brian, what are you going to do when the blacktop breaks and cracks? That's what happens with landfills. That's what happens with all of these dumps. That's why, as much as I hate having them down in Texas, I'd rather, they already got them. I'd rather they were there and not next to our river.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Yeah, my name is Jeffrey Cook, and I've been involved with the CCC back from when the consent decree was adopted. And I have a question for Brian. I have sat at a number of meetings over the years, and I just think we ought to make sure we're getting the right facts about what's going on. And I heard it was EPA say that the air over the river is regularly tested, and you haven't found detectable levels of PCBs in the air over the river. And I just would like an answer to whether that's no longer the case, or was the case, or what.
I think Brian's going to come up in a minute, and I think he's been taking some notes. Okay. Have we exhausted all the people that want? I think everybody's exhausted, but have we exhausted all the questions? You got a question back there? You're not exhausted. Okay, I'm glad to hear it. Okay. I'm looking around going once. Up, gentleman down here. Here. Here comes the mic for you.
There's been some real fear about carcinogens and poisonings, but I grew up in Pittsfield, watched the newspaper, and GE did evaluations, and they couldn't find any reason that any cancers or any diseases were more prevalent in Pittsfield than anywhere else. And I was wondering if people here knew that what the present status was. Do people in Pittsfield or live near the river, have they been looked at? And is there a problem that they found that's different than the general population?
I don't know. Good question. Okay, fair question. Thank you. Yes, go ahead. Back in the middle.
I just have a quick question to everyone here. I've only lived here since 2002, and I'm wondering, has anybody thought about the fact that the ecotourism that we've lost from having this river? And I know there's a group of children that's suing the federal government for climate devastation and that they're not going to have a future. And I'm just wondering if anybody thought about our children and how they have not had a river to enjoy over the years, and that all the money that we have lost in this area by not being able to have ecotourism.
Good question. All right. I think we're at the point where we're going to wrap things up. Is there somebody else? Okay. Last person.
Well, I guess I get to be the first and the last commenter, but I'm Sage.
You are, yeah.
And, well, I just heard people doubting that PCBs cause health problems, and to honor the memory of a man who died a few years ago, 3 years ago. He was 25 years old, and he died of a very unexplainable, at least on the surface, death. He basically got cold. His body could not regulate his temperature anymore, and he died of hypothermia was the official thing that was written on the death certificate. But he had been eating the fat of ducks from the Housatonic River. And I cannot say for sure that that was the cause of this, but PCBs are known to affect the thyroid, and the thyroid is the part that does the most regulation of temperature in the human body, the metabolism regulation. So, I mean, okay. This young man did die. The cause, in my mind, probably was PCBs.
Okay.
And
all right. Thank you, Sage. I guess 2 people want to say one last thing. 3 people. Well, let's do this. Let's go first back there, then over here, and by the time we do that, we might get a microphone in the middle, too. All the way in the back.
I'll be less than 4 minutes, believe me. But I would just like to say I've lived in the Berkshires for 10 years. I've been in Lee for a year. And I found out about this meeting when I read the Berkshire Eagle this afternoon and got here late. But I know about your 4-minute limit, okay? But what I would like to say is I'm I'm sort of amazed that we're still dealing with this issue, because when I lived in another state, 30 years ago, I was still reading about this stuff, and then I read the newspaper this afternoon, and I said, oh my God, we're still dealing with this. It's unbelievable. And what I would just like to say is that I really hope the people who are taking notes in the front are really listening to what you're hearing today, because it occurs to me that, this gentleman here spoke about how the children are not included. I'm not convinced that the public was really included in all this decision making. And I hope that this meeting is just not some pro forma pacification strategy on somebody's part to just get all this stuff out, but then go home and do exactly what you intended. That's my concern. Thank you.
Okay. Gentlemen.
I am still Reed Anderson from Risingdale, and I just want to remind everybody here in the community that John and the EPA said that they would hold further meetings. Right. And I want to make sure we hold them to that. And
well,
I would also, well, this came up quickly. I felt like we didn't have a venue and we had a date, and it was not necessarily the most eloquently organized event. I would then like to say that I would like the EPA in their negotiating to remember that, a gentleman had suggested job creation by making the dumps, and this is a short-term happy thing that is not what will benefit the community. The jobs that are getting created by removing the PCBs, and the Berkshire Hills Montessori School just put a huge expansion, beautiful expansion on their school. They're growing and growing. They are right in Lennoxdale. And it's a phenomenal school full of wonderful children. And all of them and the school, I haven't heard anybody that's really for the dump at Woods Pond. Okay. So please consider these things.
Thank you, Reed. Thank you. This gentleman, this guy in the back has got his hand up for quite a while.
Here. Can I give you that? So that man that Sage mentioned, I was close to him, and he was my mom's boyfriend at the time. And when he died, she said it was one of the hardest things she's ever gone through. And that's basically it. Okay. And I used to go to a school that was a couple miles away from the river. And I heard of another school where it was right next to the river. And they dumped some of the PCBs right next to the school where children go, where young kids go to school every day.
Okay. All right. So I want to try to thank you. Thank you very much for what you had to say. We're closing in on the end of this. I'd like to try to bring this to a close, but I will make the promise and the commitment that anybody that has further thoughts can send them to me. If you send me an email and you want to talk to me, I'll find time to talk with you. So this isn't the end of the process, and very much to Reed's point, yeah, my word, we'll be back again when we have more to talk about, and my door is always open to receive more of your comments. And I'll provide you the emails, anybody that wants to get in touch with me. It's very easy, jbickerman@bickerman.com. Send me an email, I'd be glad to hear from you. I'm going to ask Brian to make a few comments, and then I'm going to try to wrap things up, and we'll be on our way.
Not only do I have less hair than last time I was with all of you, but I have reading glasses too. So I wanted to I said most of what I wanted to say last time around when I came up here, but I want to try and answer some of the questions that were sort of left unanswered. Sage, and what's your name back there? Malcolm. I want to make clear that from EPA's perspective, we wouldn't be doing all of this if we didn't think PCBs were a problem. They are a problem. You know, so that is very clear. I appreciate your comments, and I'm sorry about the person that passed. That's really sad. But I want you to know that our whole job here is to make sure that people are safe out here, and we create a cleanup that is absolutely protective. We feel like the one that we put together for which I signed in the permit was protective. We're only now just trying to look for a solution that could be even better than that for the overall community. So that's why we're here. We will come back, Reed. We definitely will come back. We want you to hold us to that. In terms of Connecticut, Connecticut was here. Is Betsy not here anymore? I just want to check. So Betsy Wingfield, who is my counterpart in Connecticut, was here for most of the evening tonight. And she was here. Their position has consistently been, if we go and do mediation, she wants, if anything, for the cleanup to remain as strong as it is in the permit, or even stronger. They'd appreciate a cleanup that removes more PCBs from the river. That's Connecticut's position. They've been very supportive of EPA, and we appreciate that. And again, I want to make sure people know that she was here tonight. In terms of the blacktop issue next to Dave Gibbs' house, I did listen to your child. We did end up removing probably thousands of capacitors from underneath that parking lot eventually. So we do listen to the comments, and GE actually went in and did more than that they were required to do in the consent decree. So that ended up being a really good story. We do listen to the public. And sometimes the public knows more than we do about some of this stuff, especially the things that are in their neighborhoods. So we appreciate that. And finally, Jeff Cook, I wanted to answer your question. We have tested air consistently along the river. We have found detectable levels of PCBs in the air, but we've never found levels that EPA felt like were a problem. So they were detectable. We can detect very low levels of PCBs with the instrumentation we have, but they were not a problem in any of our air samples that we've taken. So I just wanted to make that clear. Finally, I just want to thank everyone for coming. This was some of what we heard we could predict. Some of what we heard I wouldn't have predicted. But it was all really great, and I think everyone was really good to each other, which is really good. And we appreciate that. Thank you, John, for helping with that, but I don't think you needed much help because everyone was very respectful with the 4 minutes and everything. And we heard from probably 90% of the people in this auditorium, which is really great. And believe me, we were listening and listening really closely, and I know, well, I don't know. I'm assuming the GE guys were listening back there. I will assume that after knowing them for a long time. I think they were listening. They didn't want to have a back and forth, just like we couldn't have a back and forth here. We're eventually maybe in litigation over this, so that's why we can't say that much at this point. But if we start to get to some solutions on the mediation, we'll be back. If we don't, you'll hear about us being in court. And EPA will work hard for the community out here, whichever path we take. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Before you leave, let me just give you a quick forward-looking sense of what we're going to do next. I can't repeat what Brian said. He hit it right on. I thought, done this many times, this was really it was a terrific group, very respectful, and made my job a lot easier. Going forward, we're going to continue meeting. And those meetings are going to be confidential, but in the confidential nature of those meetings, we'll be able to explore some of the things that you spoke about today. I know that some of the things I heard today have already been discussed. There may be more things will be discussed. And in the future, when we have something that is ready for prime time, that we'll be back to get your input again. So I just want to, again, thank everybody for coming out tonight and really appreciate how well this went. So have a good evening.